At my best friend's wedding, a girl lunged forward and caught the bouquet, only for it to slip from her hands and land squarely in my arms. My best friend, Lauren Walker, beamed at me. Madison, looks like you're the next bride. The guests exchanged knowing glances and turned toward my boyfriend of 8 years, Mason Ryder, the CEO of the Ryder Group. But he calmly plucked the bouquet from my hands and casually passed it to the girl standing beside me, his secretary, Natalie Carter. She caught it first. He ruffled my hair, his voice gentle. Be good. Give it back to Natalie. For now. We'll wait for the next time. The spotlight and the guests' attention shifted, with the bouquet settling on Natalie. I looked at her startled yet shy expression, then rested a hand on my stomach and forced a bitter smile. Mason didn't know there wouldn't be a next time. Our 8-year promise had already come to an end. We still hadn't taken the step into marriage, and I had already promised my parents, who were royalty, that next week I would leave and return to Montelvia to inherit the family legacy. The moment Natalie Carter ended up with the bouquet, my best friend Lauren Walker's smile vanished. He was even angrier than I was. Leaning close to my ear, she whispered through gritted teeth that Natalie did it on purpose. Before the wedding, I specifically told everyone the bouquet was meant for you. I gently interrupted her. Lauren, today is your big day. Little things like this don't matter. But you've waited 8 years just to marry Mason, she said anxiously, and now you're carrying his child. You still don't have the wedding soon. It's okay. I turned my head calmly and looked toward Mason Ryder. Natalie, holding the bouquet, was sitting right beside him. The distance between them was far closer than what a secretary should reasonably keep. Most of the guests were friends who knew both Mason and me well. Their eyes drifted toward me, curious, pathetic. Lauren grew even more upset and squeezed my hand tightly. Madison, I looked into Natalie earlier. She's a calculating gold digger who specializes in seducing rich men. She's been trying to get close to your boyfriend for months. Need to be careful, Lauren. You're the most beautiful bride today.
Don't worry about me.
I squeezed her hand back and gave her a faint smile. Besides, I'm not planning to marry Mason anymore. I haven't even told him I'm pregnant. My words were so shocking that Lauren's eyes widened as she stared at me in disbelief. After a long silence, she finally remembered that the wedding ceremony still had to continue. When the wedding ended, Lauren hugged me tightly. Madison, if you need any help, just tell me. I support whatever decision you make. What decision? After she left, Mason walked toward me, calm as ever. What were you two talking about just now? Out of habit, he reached out and draped an arm over my shoulders. I shifted slightly to the side and avoided the gesture. Nothing. He didn't seem to mind my reaction. With a soft laugh, he said, Are you angry Natalie caught that bouquet first? After all, she's a young girl. Of course, she dreams about weddings. Catching the bouquet was just her way of borrowing a little luck. Can we agree we'd wait for the next time? He leaned closer, stroking my hair as he patiently tried to soothe me. Why care so much about Lauren's bouquet? When we get married, I'll prepare an even more beautiful one for you. You can have as many bouquets as you want. Silently, I curled my fingers into my palm and looked straight into his eyes. Can we get married this month then? Lauren and I made a promise when we were kids. Whoever married first, the other would marry right after. We would be each other's bridesmaids and witness each other's happiness. The air seemed to freeze. Mason's hand, which had been brushing my hair, paused midair. A few seconds later, he chuckled lightly. You're still taking childhood jokes seriously. I'm the CEO of the Ryder Group. A wedding can't be thrown together so hastily. Don't rush. I promise you it will be the most perfect wedding. Bitterness surged quietly in my chest. Every time a conflict arose, he would make promises about next time, about that future wedding. 8 years had passed, and I was still waiting for the day that promise would come true. But now I had decided to go home. I wouldn't wait any longer. The car moved silently through the night. Before stopping in front of my villa, Mason unfastened his seatbelt, apparently assuming the tension between us had already passed. Out of habit, he leaned toward me, trying to kiss me. I raised my hand and pressed it lightly against his shoulder. I'm tired, Mason. He froze and stared into my eyes for a few seconds. Finally, he patted my shoulder gently. Being a bridesmaid is tiring.
Get some rest.
Natalie said she couldn't get a taxi and is still at the venue. I'll go back and pick her up. It wouldn't be safe to leave her there alone. I nodded calmly, but Mason didn't move right away. He seemed to be waiting for me to respond the way I usually did, telling him to drive safely, or complaining that he was leaving me home alone so late at night. But instead, I simply opened the car door and stepped out, watching the car drive away into the distance. I wiped the tears that stung my eyes and dialed my parents in Montelvia. Mom, Dad, I agreed to fulfill the marriage arrangement and marry Devin Ryder. My parents learned that I was pregnant. They were overjoyed. They said the child was a descendant of the royal family. They would never allow him to carry the stigma of being an illegitimate child. He would be given the best future possible. They also told me that Devin had already prepared several wedding plans for me to choose from. I booked a flight for 3 days later. After returning to the villa, I began clearing out the bedroom drawers. Years of keepsakes I had carefully saved. The love letters Mason had written to me, and the photos we had taken together. By the time I finished packing my luggage, Mason came home. "You're still up this late." His gaze swept over the messy closet and the suitcase beside it. His tone was relaxed. "Why are you suddenly sorting through clothes and organizing the closet? Going on a trip?" I didn't answer his question. Instead, I asked calmly, "Did you take Natalie home?" "Yeah, her apartment's pretty remote. It really is hard to get a taxi there."
Oh.
I lowered my head and turned to leave. Next second, Mason wrapped his arms around me from behind. The rose perfume clinging to him made me feel slightly nauseous. It was Natalie's scent. Instinctively, I pushed him away. His body stiffened. He looked at me for 2 seconds, then let out a laugh. "You're still mad about the bouquet? Don't be so petty." He stood up, loosening his tie, his tone helpless, like he was coaxing a child. "All right, I'll order you a bigger bouquet tomorrow. Let's wash up and get some sleep." I got a meeting in the morning. With that, he headed toward the bathroom. I watched his back and said softly, "I promised my parents I'd return to Montelvia to get married in a week." Mason's hand froze on the bathroom doorknob. When he turned back, his patience had clearly run out. His brows knit together in irritation. "Madison, stop making trouble. I told you, I'm the CEO. I can't just impulsively throw together a wedding without any planning. Marriage is something between the two of us. We can't rush into it, just because of some promise you made with your best friend." Then I took a deep breath, holding on to the last thread of hope. "If I were pregnant, would you give me and the baby a home?" His expression faltered for a moment. Then he lifted a hand and pressed his fingers to his temple. "A wedding and having a child are both major life events. I want everything to happen according to plan. Madison, the writer group, has many important projects right now. This is a critical stage in my career. Getting married at this moment would only distract me and disrupt all my plans. So don't use pregnancy as an excuse. I want to welcome the child when everything is properly prepared." His words fell like stones, each one crashing heavily into my heart. The pain was unbearable. In that moment, I decided to put away every last expectation I had. Seeing my reddened eyes, Mason sighed, his expression softening. "Just wait 1 more year once my career stabilizes, Will." Before he could finish yet another promise, the ringing of his phone interrupted him. On the call, Natalie told him there was an urgent issue with the project. Everyone needed to gather immediately for a meeting. After hanging up, Mason left. He took his luggage with him and never came back. Perhaps my sudden talk of marriage had made him feel suffocated. The company had simply given him the perfect excuse to move out and avoid my pressure. What he didn't know was that by the time he returned, I would probably already be back in Montelvia. In the days before my departure, I quietly took care of everything that needed to be done. I sold the house we had lived in together at a reduced price. On the day I handed the keys to the real estate agent, I discovered a stack of project documents from Mason's company in the study. After hesitating for a moment, I decided to deliver them to him. Just as I reached the door of his office, I heard laughter and conversation coming from inside. Not only were Natalie and Mason there, but so were a few of his close friends. I was about to knock when one of them spoke. "Mason, the others already know you and Madison argued at the wedding. They've been secretly asking me if the two of you broke up." Natalie caught sight of me standing at the doorway. Her voice sounded apologetic, but the look she gave me was openly provocative. "Mason, it's all my fault. It was my first time attending a wedding, so I didn't know the customs. I shouldn't have grabbed the bouquet and caused a fight between you and Madison." Mason's voice followed. "It has nothing to do with you. Madison's just being petty." One of his friends began to tease him, testing the waters. "Mason, are you serious? This time you even moved out. Are you planning to break up with Madison and get together with Natalie?" Mason paused. When he spoke again, his voice carried a hint of coldness. "What nonsense are you talking about? I love Madison. How could I possibly break up with her? I moved out because I want her to reflect on herself. She can't keep acting so possessive all the time." Mason didn't notice the flash of jealousy that crossed Natalie's face. "When she's done reflecting, I'll move back home." His assistant spoke cautiously, his tone hesitant. "Mr. Ryder, are you really going to keep giving Miss Blake the cold shoulder? Yesterday I saw Miss Walker buying a dress. I even heard her tell the sales clerk that in a week, she'd be a bridesmaid for her best friend." "Her best friend?" Isn't that Miss Blake? The room fell silent since expressions diffused. A wedding without a groom.
There's no such thing, he said.
Normally, I indulge her enough. But this time, she needs to understand that I'm the CEO of the writer group. Not everything can go her way. She can't make every decision. I gently set the documents down on the floor outside the door. Then I turned and walked away without looking back. The next day, carrying my luggage, I boarded a plane bound for Montelvia. The flight to Montelvia took 14 hours, but for the first time in 8 years, I slept soundly. When the plane finally touched down on the private tarmac of the royal estate, the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried in my chest for the better part of a decade finally lifted. The crisp mountain air of my homeland greeted me, carrying the faint scent of pine and early blooming frost roses. Waiting for me at the bottom of the air stair was a line of black luxury vehicles, flanked by the royal guard. Standing at the forefront was a man who commanded the space simply by existing in it. Devon Ryder. He was dressed in a meticulously tailored charcoal suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and towering height. As the elusive head of the global writer conglomerate, and technically, the estranged uncle of Mason, Devon operated on a level of power and wealth that made Mason's CEO title look like child's play. Devon was a man of the shadows, a myth in the business world, and a trusted ally to the Montelvian royal family. As I descended the steps, his striking silver-flecked eyes met mine. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no impatience. Only a quiet, unwavering calm. "Welcome home, Madison," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. He stepped forward, offering his hand not out of obligation, but with genuine respect. I placed my hand in his. "Thank you, Devon, for everything." He gently guided me toward the waiting car. "Your parents are waiting at the palace." But first, he paused, his gaze dropping briefly to my stomach before meeting my eyes again with absolute warmth. "How was the flight? Are you and the little one all right?" The genuine concern in his voice caught me off guard. Mason had never asked me how I felt. To Mason, my feelings were an inconvenience, a disruption to his carefully scheduled life. "We're perfectly fine." I smiled, a real, unforced smile. Once inside the privacy of the car, Devon poured me a glass of warm water. "I have drafted 3 different variations for the wedding, from a private, intimate ceremony at the royal chapel to a grand, public affair. The choice is entirely yours. There is no pressure, Madison. My primary duty is to protect you and give your child the legitimate standing the royal family requires. But beyond that, I want you to be happy." I looked at this man, so drastically different from his nephew. Where Mason was reckless and constantly chasing the next high, Devon was a mountain. Immovable, secure, and deeply considerate. "A grand public affair," I said softly, looking out the window as the lush, historical landscape of Montelvia rolled past. "I've spent 8 years waiting in the shadows. I don't want to hide anymore." Devon's lips curved into a faint, handsome smile. "Then a royal spectacle it shall be." 5 days later, Mason Ryder pushed open the door to the villa.
He was exhausted.
The past few days at the office had been a nightmare. Natalie had mismanaged a crucial contract with a European supplier, and he had spent 72 hours doing damage control. He dropped his keys on the entryway table, expecting to hear the familiar sound of Madison's footsteps, the quiet hum of the kettle boiling, or her soft voice asking about his day. Instead, he was met with dead silence. "Madison," he called out, loosening his tie. He was ready for her to be angry. He had planned a whole speech about how she needed to stop being so childish, how he was willing to forgive her little outburst about moving away, and how he had even bought a necklace to make up for the bouquet incident. He flipped on the living room light. The space felt strange. The plush throw blankets she loved were gone. The photos on the mantelpiece, vacations to Aspen, their first anniversary, her college graduation, were missing. Frowning, Mason strode down the hall and threw open the door to the master bedroom. The closet was half empty. Her vanity was stripped bare. A cold spike of dread pierced his chest. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact before dialing. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." He stared at the screen, his heart rate accelerating. No longer in service? That was impossible. He immediately dialed Lauren. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Where is she?" Mason demanded, dropping all pleasantries. Lauren let out a dry, mocking laugh. "Where is who?" "The woman you treated like an unpaid maid and an emotional punching bag for 8 years. "Lauren, I'm not in the mood for games." "Where is Madison? Did she move in with you?" "You really are completely clueless, aren't you, Mason? You think the world revolves around your little company. Madison is gone. She left the country. And by the way, she sold the house. You have until tomorrow to get your remaining trash out before the new owners change the locks." "Sold the house," Mason yelled, his composed facade shattering. "She can't sell the house, he stopped. The deed was entirely in Madison's name. She had bought it with her own money years ago. He had just lived there. She can and she did, Lauren snapped. Don't ever contact me again. I'm busy fitting my bridesmaid dress for a groom who actually knows her worth. The line went dead. Mason stumbled backward, sitting on the edge of the mattress. His mind raced.
Groom?
What groom? She couldn't have found someone else. She loves me. She's obsessed with me. His eyes darted to the bedside table. Sitting perfectly centered on the dark wood was a single, sleek folder. He reached out with trembling hands and flipped it open. Inside was a cashier's check for the exact amount of his half of the shared furniture, down to the last cent. Beneath it was a note, written in Madison's elegant handwriting. I dropped your project documents outside your office on Tuesday. I didn't want to interrupt your laugh with Natalie. I'll take your advice and reflect on myself. I've realized my worth. Goodbye, Mason. There won't be a next time. The documents. Tuesday. The blood drained from Mason's face as the memory crashed into him. The laughter in the office. His friends joking. His own voice echoing through the wood. I want her to reflect on herself. I'm the CEO, not everything can go her way. She had heard it all. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was an urgent text from his assistant. Mr. Ryder, we have a massive problem. The bank just pulled our credit line for the European expansion. They said the order came directly from the main family trust. Devin Ryder is freezing our assets. Mason stared at the message, his world rapidly collapsing. Life in the palace was a whirlwind of silk, diamonds, and endless joy. My parents doted on me, entirely focused on my health, and the baby growing inside me. Devin and I spent our evenings walking through the royal gardens. What started as an arrangement built on mutual convenience and family duty rapidly blossomed into something profoundly real. Devin was a man of action. When I mentioned I missed the taste of a specific pastry from the city, a fresh batch appeared on my breakfast table the next morning. When my ankles swelled, he didn't tell me I was overreacting. He knelt down in his bespoke suits and massaged my feet himself. You don't have to do that, I told him one evening, my face flushing as he sat on the edge of my bed, gently rubbing my calves. You run a global empire, Devin. He looked up at me, his silver-flecked eyes softening. My empire means nothing if the woman carrying my child is uncomfortable. He's not biologically yours, I whispered, the lingering guilt of my past still catching in my throat. Devin's hand stilled, and he moved up, cupping my cheek. Biology is just science, Madison. This child will bear my name, will be raised with my love, and will inherit everything I have. He is mine, and you are mine to protect. Let me protect you. Tears blurred my vision, and I leaned into his touch. For the first time in my life, I felt truly safe. Meanwhile, Lauren arrived in Montelvia. When she stepped out of the royal escort vehicle and saw the palace, she nearly fainted. Madison, she shrieked, sprinting toward me as I stood on the marble steps. She hugged me tight, careful of my slightly rounding belly. You didn't tell me you were an actual princess. I thought returning to the family legacy meant you were taking over a dairy farm or something. I laughed, a bright, echoing sound that felt foreign to my own ears. I'm sorry I kept it a secret. It was for my own safety while living abroad. Forgiven, she gasped, staring at the diamond tiara resting on a velvet cushion carried by a passing servant. Oh my God. And the groom? Devin Ryder? Wait, Ryder? Yes, I nodded, my smile fading slightly into something more serious. Mason's uncle. Lauren's jaw dropped. Slowly, a wicked, triumphant grin spread across her face. Oh, this is going to be the greatest wedding in human history. 2 weeks before the royal wedding, a grand gala was held in Montelvia's capital to celebrate the upcoming union. The ballroom was a sea of glittering chandeliers, champagne, and the global elite. Back in the States, Mason was drowning. The Ryder Group was on the verge of bankruptcy due to the frozen assets. Natalie's incompetence had cost them millions, and his board of directors was threatening to oust him. Desperate, Mason had flown to Montelvia, begging for an audience with the head of the family, Devin Ryder, hoping to salvage his company. He didn't know about the wedding. He only knew that Devin was hosting a massive gala. Through sheer bribery and pulling family strings, Mason managed to slip past the outer security and into the grand hall. He stood near the back, his once immaculate suit looking slightly rumpled, his eyes frantically scanning the crowd for his uncle. Then, the murmurs in the room died down. The grand string quartet shifted their melody, playing a soaring, triumphant processional. Presenting His Grace, Devin Ryder, and his fiancée, Her Royal Highness, Princess Madison of Montelvia, the herald announced. Mason's drink slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. At the top of the grand staircase stood his uncle, looking like a king. And beside him, her arm looped gracefully through his, was Madison. She wore a breathtaking gown of midnight blue silk that hugged her newly blossoming curves. A delicate diamond tiara rested in her styled hair. She looked radiant. She looked powerful. She looked entirely, utterly out of his reach. Princess Madison? Mason's brain short-circuit. Fiancé? Without thinking, driven by a toxic mix of panic, possessiveness, and disbelief, Mason shoved his way through the crowd of billionaires and aristocrats. Madison, he yelled, his voice cracking. The room went dead silent. Royal guards instantly stepped forward, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. Devon held up a single, commanding hand, halting them. I looked down from the staircase. My heart, which used to beat frantically at the mere sight of Mason, didn't even flutter. I felt nothing but a mild, distant pity. Mason, Devon said, his voice deadly calm, slicing through the tension in the room. What is the meaning of this intrusion? Mason ignored his uncle, his wild eyes locked on me. Madison, what is this? What kind of sick joke are you playing? You ran away, you sold my house, and now you're pretending to be royalty to get back at me? And with my uncle? He took a step up the stairs. Come here. Stop this embarrassment right now. Let's go home. He reached out his hand, using that same patronizing, commanding tone he had used for 8 years. The tone that said, I am in charge. You will obey, and I will indulge you when I have the time. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. You are mistaken, Mr. Ryder, I said softly, but the acoustics of the grand hall carried my voice perfectly. I have no home with you. Madison, please, Mason pleaded, his anger faltering as he finally registered the coldness in my eyes. I know you're mad about the bouquet. I know you're mad about Natalie. I fired her. She ruined a project, and I kicked her out. I'll marry you. Look, I'm saying it right now. We can get married next month. Just come down here. Before I could speak, Devon stepped slightly in front of me, a protective shield. You will address my fiancée with the respect her title demands, Mason. Devon's voice was like cracking ice. And you will lower your voice in her presence. She is carrying my heir, and she should not be subjected to the ravings of a failed businessman. The words hit Mason like a physical blow. He staggered back. Heir? Pregnant. He looked at my stomach, a horrifying realization dawning on his face.
No.
No, we were together. This child, I interrupted, my voice sharp and unyielding, belongs to Montelvia. And to the man who actually wanted us. You told me you wanted everything to happen according to your plan, Mason. You told me a child would disrupt your life. Congratulations. Your life is no longer disrupted by me. I was stressed. Mason screamed, tears finally spilling over his cheeks, dropping to his knees on the velvet-lined stairs. I was an idiot. Madison, you promised me. 8 years. We loved each other. You can't just throw that away. You threw it away, I replied, my voice softening not with pity, but with finality. Every time you told me to wait. Every time you chose a meeting, a secretary, or your pride over me. You threw it away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for me to hold on to. I looked at Devon, who offered me his arm. I took it. Guards, Devon commanded softly. Escort my nephew out. And see to it that his shares in the Ryder Trust are liquidated tomorrow morning. He is no longer part of this family.
No.
Uncle Devon, wait. Madison, please. The guards seized Mason by the arms, dragging him backward. He thrashed and sobbed, calling my name until the heavy oak doors of the ballroom slammed shut, cutting off his pathetic cries. The string quartet resumed playing. Devon looked down at me, his thumb gently brushing the back of my hand. Are you all right? I've never been better, I smiled. And I meant it. The wedding took place a week later. It was broadcast internationally. The streets of Montelvia were lined with thousands of cheering citizens, throwing white rose petals as the royal carriage carried Devon and me toward the grand cathedral. Lauren was by my side, looking absolutely stunning in her emerald bridesmaid gown. She held my hand tightly. You know, she whispered as we waited by the cathedral doors. I saw the news this morning. What news? I asked, adjusting my veil. Mason. The Ryder Group officially filed for bankruptcy. He's being investigated for corporate fraud because of the mess Natalie left behind. Apparently, Natalie turned state's evidence against him to save herself. Lauren grinned viciously. Karma is a beautiful, beautiful thing. I felt a brief flicker of sadness, not for the man he was now, but for the boy I had loved when I was 18. But that boy was dead, and the man who replaced him had dug his own grave. Let the past bury the past, I said softly. The heavy oak doors swung open. The majestic sound of the cathedral organ filled the air, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the impossibly long aisle, lined with thousands of white lilies, stood Devon. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He wasn't looking at the crowd. His eyes were fixed entirely on me, filled with a fiery, unyielding devotion that took my breath away. As I walked down the aisle, I didn't feel like I was walking toward an arranged marriage or a family obligation. I was walking toward my partner, my equal, my home. When I reached him, Devin took my hands in his. His thumb gently traced my knuckles. "You look breathtaking," he whispered. "You don't look too bad yourself, Mr. Ryder," I whispered back. The Archbishop spoke the vows, ancient and heavy with tradition. But when it came time for Devin to speak, he bypassed the traditional Montelvian script. "I, Devin, take you, Madison. Not just as my princess, not just as my wife, but as the very center of my world. I promise to never make you wait. I promise to never put my pride before your peace. I will stand before you to protect you, beside you to support you, and behind you to catch you if you fall. For this lifetime and whatever comes next." Tears streamed down my face, freely and happily. "I, Madison, take you, Devin. To be my husband, my sanctuary, and my greatest adventure. I promise to cherish you, to lead our family with honor, and to love you without reservation, today and for all my tomorrows. You may kiss the bride." Devin's hands cupped my face, and he kissed me, a deep, grounding, soul-shattering kiss that promised forever. The cathedral erupted in thunderous applause. Epilogue, the next time. 5 years later. The sun was setting over the Montelvian mountains, casting a golden glow across the royal gardens. I sat on a woven blanket, leaning back against Devin's chest as his strong arms wrapped around me. A few feet away, our 4-year-old son, Julian, was attempting to catch a butterfly, his little legs carrying him as fast as he could. He had Devin's dark hair and my eyes. He was the light of our lives, the true heir to the kingdom and the Ryder Empire, raised with more love and attention than any child could ask for. And resting perfectly on my heavily pregnant belly was Devin's hand, feeling the soft kicks of our second child, a little girl due in just a few weeks. "He's going to trample the hydrangeas again," Devin mused lazily, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Let him." I laughed softly. "They'll grow back." "Everything grows back eventually," Devin murmured, kissing my cheek. Far away, across the ocean in a dingy, one-bedroom apartment in a forgotten suburb, a man sat alone in the dark. Mason Ryder stared at the flickering television screen. The news channel was doing a special feature on the Montelvian royal family, showing footage of Princess Madison and her husband, the billionaire philanthropist Devin Ryder, inaugurating a new children's hospital. On the screen, Devin looked at Madison with an adoration so profound it radiated through the television. Madison laughed, glowing with happiness, her hand resting over her pregnant stomach. Mason looked down at his own hands. They were shaking. His apartment smelled of stale beer and regret. He had lost everything. His company, his friends, his reputation, and the only woman who had ever truly loved him. He remembered his own words, echoing from a lifetime ago. "Be good. Give it back to Natalie. For now, we'll wait for the next time." He closed his eyes as a single, agonizing tear slipped down his cheek. He finally understood. For some mistakes, there is no forgiveness. And for some people, there is never a next time.